Hello, welcome back. We are now on chapter 9, where we'll use different methods to reuse objects in AutoCAD. Now, the most powerful thing about AutoCAD is that you never want to draw the same thing twice. You can reuse objects you produced in the past in your future projects, current and future projects. And so these two methods are a great way of organizing your file and repurposing the files that you created for other projects. So, for example, I've downloaded this file here, and feel free to follow along, telephone.dwg. And someone drafted this in AutoCAD. Now, this is a very, very sophisticated drawing. You can see here, it's comprised of lines, arcs, and quite a bit of drafting here. You can see here, all these objects here are created individually. And this is a very, very complex CAD file. If I were to move this file, and I accidentally leave out certain parts of the file when moving the object. Like I said, for example, I put a window here and I move it to the right. You can see here, I accidentally left these pieces here behind. And so when moving objects that you drafted in AutoCAD, it's important to maintain all the objects in a group. So in AutoCAD, there's a command here called block. And here there's a tool here that lets you create blocks as well as insert blocks. In the insert tab here, there's also the create block command here, for example. Let's go back to the home tab. Let's just do it here. There's create. So whenever you have a group of elements that you want to group together as a single unit, you use the create button to make a block. When I use create, here it wants some information on the object you're trying to group together. Here you want a name. Let's say, for example, I'll call this telephone, for obvious reasons. And here it wants a pick point. So later, when you insert this block into a drawing, it wants to know what reference point you want to use to place it in a file. So, for example, a pick point, and it could be anywhere. So I'll pick point here, I'll use the bottom right-hand corner of the drawing, right there. I'll pick that point on the screen. And then you'll see this information is now entered into the file. Over here it says select object, and they got a little button there. And here it says convert to block. So whatever it is I'm going to select is going to be converted into this thing called a block. So if I do select objects here, and I pick that green button there, and I select all these objects, I'm going to draw a window, pick top left, the bottom right, and grab everything, all blue. I then hit enter if I'm done selecting. And then there, it captured the drawing up there, a little snapshot of the drawing there. And then over here on the right, it says allow exploding. If you ever need to disassemble this drawing into its parts, will AutoCAD let you do it with the explode command, is what it's asking. This says yes, it's going to let you explode the file. And so currently, these are the only options we care about at the moment. So we're going to hit OK. And there, you've made a block. If I select this object, click, you can see it's all together. And the insertion point is this blue grip right here. It'll have an insertion point somewhere on the screen, placing it exactly where you chose the insertion point from the block create menu. Now, if you want to confirm it, this is the block, you can also type LI for list, touch this object, hit enter, and then AutoCAD will give you some information. Here it says the block reference here. It is a block reference. Otherwise, it'll mention it's a line, a circle, some object. But you see here, it says it's a block, and the block name is called telephone. And right then, you understand that it has been transformed into this group called a block in AutoCAD, and the name is telephone. Escape. So let's say you want to reuse that object again. And that object doesn't have to be on the screen necessarily. It can be erased. Let's delete that object. The thing about blocks is that once you create them, they're in this file's memory. It sort of remembers all the blocks you've created in the past and keeps a log of all those block names so that you can reuse them in the current project you're in. So they don't necessarily have to be visible. So here, if I go to Insert, right there, click, it'll give me a little icon, a little picture of all the blocks in this file. And currently there's only one called telephone. You can see here when I click recent blocks, you see here, currently there's a little telephone right there. Ignore the other one. So for example, if I want to reuse that block, I would go to Insert, I find the picture, or go to recent blocks and find it on the list. I would click on it, and there it comes back. And it's attached to the insertion point you chose. The insertion point is here's where my mouse is located. And when I click on the screen, that's exactly where it'll place it. And so that is now a block. If you need to disassemble this block and maybe erase some of these buttons here or make some changes to the block, then there's some editing that needs to take place. If I double click on the block, here it gives me the name of the block, and I'm about to edit the block. This is where I want to make changes. If I hit OK, I'm in this place here where the screen turns gray, and I'm in the process of editing a block. And here, when you go back to the Home tab, you can do some drafting. You can erase objects here. You can modify. You can maybe get rid of that button there. Like, for example, can erase these buttons here. Hit delete as an example. And then back in the block editor here, when I'm done doing all these revisions, these changes, I can choose to close the block editor. This place here in gray that I'm currently working on, the block, I can close these menus here. I can close the block editor. And do you want to save these changes, yes or no? Let's ignore the changes for the time being. Give some more examples of the power of blocks. If I were to copy this block and place it over here, for example, and copy that block and place it over there, for example, and you had to change all the blocks in a file because there's been some update, all you have to do is grab any of the blocks and edit them and make the change that you desire. So for example, here, if I erase these buttons here, hit delete, and then I save this work under the block editor tab, close the block editor, hit OK, it's going to ask me, do I want to save changes? And I could say yes. I can say save the changes. If I do that, it not only changes the one block I edited, it changes all the blocks. They've all been updated instantly to your current revision. And so those buttons there disappeared and all the blocks are identical. So that's the power of blocks. If I were to take this block here and choose the explode command, right there is explode. Then if I notice here, this has been disassembled into parts. Now, the trouble here is that if I were to recreate the block using the exact same name, the danger is that I would use the wrong insertion point. Remember, the insertion point is if you click on the block, that little dot right there is the insertion point I chose. So for example, if I draw a rectangle around this file perfectly, I draw another rectangle around this file perfectly. And this one was exploded, and I made some change, some random change. Maybe I got rid of that button there. And I chose to recreate the block with the exact same name. Now, this list here is a block library. It gives you the name of all the blocks that are currently in your file. And if you look in the list, the telephone is currently in your file. So if I chose it a second time, it lets me do it. It lets me pick a point. But let's say, for example, I chose this corner of the phone up here at the top as a pick point, which is incorrect. That's not the same point I chose last time. But let's say I did it, for example. If I chose that point and I do select objects and I choose the same objects and I allow it to be exploded, yes, fine. If I hit OK, it's going to recognize the fact that it already has a block called telephone and here you are making a new block called telephone. What would you like to do? Redefine means you erase the old block and replace it with the new block that has the same name. Or here it says don't redefine the block called telephone. Don't make the change. Cancel, basically. If I say redefine the block, it's going to change not only the one you're creating now, it's going to change all the copies. Here it says there are 2 instances of telephone in the drawing. That means there's 2 copies, instances or copies of the block called telephone somewhere in the file. I'm going to redefine the block. I'm going to make a change. But you got to be careful, because if you did this and you chose the wrong insertion point, you see these get relocated because the insertion point dictates where it gets placed on the screen. If you change the insertion point, the file will shift, and suddenly you've got this happening. When in fact, I should have chose this corner here for the insertion point. I accidentally chose this corner here, and now they all move relative to that corner. You could have made a change across hundreds of files or hundreds of blocks in a drawing and made a mess of things. You got to be very careful to use the same insertion point when editing the block. Obviously here I would undo. I would click on one of the blocks and I would confirm that that's the insertion point right there. And I would snap onto that very same point if I'm having to explode and edit any of the blocks if they've been exploded. One way to make a change is to explode and recreate. And the other way is just simply edit. I suggest you simply edit and you don't have to worry about picking the insertion point.